How we doing now? Good to go? All right, perfect. All right, so how we doing this morning?
Yay.
All right, okay. I am so excited to be giving this talk, and because it kind of takes me to my roots as far as really foundational unity teachings. And so, I really wanted to bring this to the community. So today's talk is Origins, a return to innocence. It's part of a 3-part series, Reflections in Truth, which is based on Lessons in Truth by Emilie, Cady. And it is a core text in the unity movement. So, and these 3 lessons, beginning lessons, or lessons 1, 2, and 3, because there are 12 lessons, they refer to a return, a reset that we all experience in consciousness. So sometimes that return or reset is a return to an original state of consciousness that we were. We took a journey in consciousness, and then we said, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And so then we return to that original state. Or it could be returning to an original question. For example, if after having a discussion, a philosophical discussion, okay, now we will return back to the original question, and then you ask that same question, and now you're expanded because you have new information that was acquired during that discussion. Or so when you go on a journey and then you find yourself at a crossroads in life, and you now, after exploring this journey for however long you explore this journey, you say, something, this is not really what I want. So you've acquired that information, and then you go back to that original state of consciousness where, okay, well, what I really want is this, but now you have that information that was acquired. Am I making any sense? Okay. All right. Okay. So it's kind of like a video game. See, I used to be a gamer, and so I used to enjoy playing video games. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but playing video games, so you would play the game, and so something would end up happening, and next thing you know, your character would die or something, and then so you knew at that point, okay, I'm not going to do that again. And so you basically, when you get back, it took you back to an earlier moment in the game, and so once you got back to that same section where you died before, now you're going to do something different, because what you did before didn't work. So that's basically what I'm talking about. The story, biblically, the story of the prodigal son talks about a return, a reset, where the son initially say, hey, just give me my money. I know what to do. And so he goes out and he parties and has a great time, and then things don't work out. And so at some point he finds himself at a really low place in life where he's out living with the pigs. And so he said, something, the servants at my father's house live better than I'm living right now. So what I'm going to do, he still has his ideas. Like, what I'm going to do now, because I see that this didn't work. So now I'm going to return to my father's house. And so I'm going to ask him to take me as one of his servants. And so at that point, see, now he's been expanded in consciousness. He realizes that all the things that he did, which seemed like great ideas before, were not great ideas. And so now he wants to return at that point. He's expanded in consciousness. Hey, this doesn't work. And now maybe my father will take me back as a servant. It didn't work out that way. It was actually a beautiful story. The father just rushed out to him. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage for where Lessons in Truth begins. Written by Emilie Cady. Harriet Emilie Cady, born in 1848 to 1941, was an American homeopathic physician and author of New Thought Spiritual Teaching, or New Thought Spiritual Writings. Her 1896 book, Lessons in Truth, a course of 12 lessons in practical Christianity, is now considered the core text on Unity Church teachings. It is the most widely read book in the Unity movement and has sold over 1.6 million copies since its first publication. Taught by Emma Curtis Hopkins, who is known as the New Thought teacher of teachers, Cady also associated with several prominent figures in the New Thought movement, of the time, including divine science minister Emmett Fox, Ernest Holmes, founder of religious science, and Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, co-founders of Unity. So lesson 1 really takes us to a beginning, and it's basically a choice. And lesson 1 is entitled Bondage or Liberty, which? So there comes a time in life when we arrive at these crossroads. It's usually precipitated by an idea that it is time for a change, or I don't want to do this anymore, or, there must be a better way. So this creates basically a desire for change. And so it is that willingness for change that actually assists us in making that decision, which then opens up a new realm of possibilities. So we find ourselves at a crossroads in life. And so that's where it basically begins. For in order to make a choice for change, we must first possess a willingness to make that change. So, Emilie Cady was a student of biblical writings. Now, back in 1896, when Lessons in Truth was first written, the Bible was like on the top 3 reading list as far as, so she wrote Lessons in Truth in biblical language. All right. Now, so back in 1896, it was a hit. Because it really impacted the community. They enjoyed reading the Bible anyway. And so it offered them a higher viewpoint for the Bible. Now, today in 2020, there are many of us who may not feel as inclined to read, or who feel turned off or don't feel the connection with the biblical writings in the Bible because it's kind of like older. It's kind of older, and it's older languaging and things like that. And so we feel a disconnect. So I am going to metaphysically interpret the writings. I also paraphrase. And so that way we can get her teachings from a modern lens. So, but I am going to start off with her the way she originally writes it. So every man believes himself to be preoccupied with the flesh. Notice the languaging. And to the things of the flesh. All suffering is the result of this belief. Now, flesh metaphysically in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary is referring to mortal consciousness. So it's referring to mortal consciousness that is expressing itself through human appetites. That appetite could be for chocolate cake. That appetite could be for anything, but it's basically world consciousness. Now, I discussed mortal consciousness, but I didn't discuss it in terms of motor consciousness. I have discussed it in terms of world consciousness. A few talks back when I talked about being as little children, I referred to mortal consciousness as on the floor consciousness. When we have chains, as far as our attachments in life, things that we're attached to that kind of keep us held to the ground. And then we start to, as we really get attached in life, it's like it puts us on the floor as far as our consciousness. So I called it on the floor consciousness in that one. In my last talk, I called it street level consciousness, where it's like we're at the middle of a busy intersection. And so we're seeing all these things, from this narrow point of view and wanting to judge everything, not seeing the big picture. And so street level consciousness. So mortal consciousness is the same thing. It's the same thing. It's synonymous with street level consciousness. It's synonymous with on the floor consciousness. So continue with Emilie Cady. The history of the coming of the children of Israel out of their long bondage in Egypt is descriptive of the human mind or consciousness growing up out of the animal or sense part of man and into the spiritual part. So consciousness growing up out of the animal or sense part is basically referring to our lower forms of consciousness or of thought to the higher. Now, metaphysically, in Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, the children of Israel, the Israelites, is referring to the illumined thoughts in consciousness which are undergoing spiritual discipline. They typify that in us which is always endeavoring to follow the inner leading of the divine law. They are our spiritual thoughts, the the thoughts that pertain to the real and enduring ideas upon which man and the universe are founded. Egypt is referring to mental preoccupation to sense thoughts, material consciousness. So it's basically referring to being rooted in things that we see and feel and touch and taste, and being more preoccupied with that than being focused on the spiritual. All right, so Egypt consciousness is basically referring to a preoccupation with sense-based consciousness. That's all it means. And so it's still synonymous with world consciousness. Now, Egypt metaphysically is referring to sense-based consciousness, but Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh. And Pharaoh metaphysically, in our Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, is referring to our adverse ego. Now, our adverse ego is the same thing as the ego that is discussed in A Course in Miracles. It's the same thing. The ego specifically is our personality, but the adverse ego is that part of our personality that is greedy, that is selfish, that feels inferior, but yet wants to be superior, that argues for separation. So that is the adverse ego. That is Pharaoh in the Bible. And so she writes in this languaging. So I'm just kind of laying the foundation for understanding. So now the primary means of control that the adverse ego has at its disposal is our amygdala. Now, our amygdala, I'll give you a definition of it, and then I'll tell you exactly, how it's working. So it's located within the temporal lobe of the brain. The amygdala, or stress center, is a limbic system structure that is involved in the activation and the processing of survival-based emotions such as fear and anxiety. So now, the amygdala was very, very, very important in the early development of man. About 100,000 years ago, we wouldn't even be here right now if it were not for our amygdala. We would not be here today. So our amygdala, what it would do is, because we had so many things in our environment 100,000 years ago that were trying to eat us. Okay, so it would basically have us be aware of our environment and be suspicious of anything, suspicious of shadows in case there was a leopard or a panther getting ready to jump out. And so that way it would prepare us for fight or flight. All right, so it definitely served a role or a purpose 100,000 years ago, and all the way up until about 13,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago. It definitely served a role. We would not be here if it weren't for our amygdala. However, in a social setting, what it is doing is now protecting us in the standpoint of social settings. So when someone, for example, doesn't say good morning to us, then the adverse ego is activating our amygdala. And so now at this point, so it's preparing us as far as a fight or flight, or getting angry because someone didn't say good morning to us, for example. And so in social settings, what it's actually doing now is it is preventing us, or it is preventing us, it's basically not serving the purpose that it was initially intended for. So it's outserved its usefulness in a social setting where we don't have to worry about walking out into the street and being in danger. All right. So that's what the amygdala was for survival. But now, because it's not being used for survival, it's being activated in social settings. So if someone disagrees with us, we feel like we're being attacked. And so it activates the amygdala. So I'm talking about these things because I want to give you all also a scientific reason for some things to actually have a foundation as I continue with Emilie Cady. So think of spiritual ideas or the Israelites as plants, and think of Egypt consciousness for the remainder of this talk as a metaphor, like being in the basement. So in order for these plants to grow and flourish, we have to take it out of that basement consciousness and move it into a place that is conducive for them regenerating or bearing fruit or being regenerative and giving birth to new spiritual ideas. They will not give birth to new spiritual ideas when they're in basement consciousness. So we have to take it out of there. Hence, it was necessary for the children of Israel to go out of Egypt so that they could become a new country, so that they could flourish. And we know how that story goes. So, paraphrasing Emilie, Cady, and Jehovah said, speaking to Moses, I have surely seen the affliction of my people that are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry by reason of the sickness, sorrow, and poverty in mind, body, and spirit. And I will deliver them out of the land of Egypt, the basement, unto a good land flowing with milk and honey, abundant life. These words express exactly the attitudes of the Creator towards His highest creation in man. This is how Emilie, Cady begins. So each man must sooner or later learn to stand alone with his God. Nothing else avails. Nothing else will ever make you master of your own destiny. There is in your own indwelling Lord all the life and health, all the strength and peace and joy, all the wisdom and support that you can ever need or desire. It is the spring of all joy and comfort and power. Hitherto we have believed that we were helped and comforted by others, that we receive joy from outside circumstances and surroundings, but it is not so. All joy and strength and good spring up from a fountain within one's own being. I want you all to think about that. I want you to think about that. Think about instances and circumstances and people that have brought joy to your life. Now, what Emilie, Cady is saying is it had nothing to do with them. It had to do with the God that is within you. The God that was within you was expressing through the God that is within them. But it is the God that is within you, and what is it that you need that is actually activating the God that is within them. So I want you to keep that in mind. So as we find ourselves now at this crossroads, we are emboldened by our choices in what road we choose to travel as infinite beings. So part 2, doing versus being. No matter with what object you first started out to seek truth, it was in reality because it was for you to arise and begin to claim your inheritance. You were no longer to be satisfied nor preoccupied with the elements of the world. To be free, to have dominion over all things material, to be no longer a slave, but a son or daughter in possession of your inheritance. Everything that works in this universe happens for our good. Sometimes we lose sight of that. Sometimes we don't see that. But we have to have an axiom in our mind when things get kind of fuzzy and where we get kind of confused. And that axiom has to be a truth statement that's anchored in truth. For example, God is good all the time. Now, if God is good all the time, but I'm not seeing that, then maybe I need to raise my thoughts a little higher. All right. Okay, so let's keep on moving because there's a lot of material to cover. All right, so we have come to a place now where our search for truth must no longer be the rewards, but rather for living life. Every right thought that we think, every unselfish word or action is brought by immutable laws which yield results. But in our walk, we must learn to be less preoccupied with external results and rather seek to consciously be the truth, to be love, to be wisdom, to be life, and let results take care of themselves. So, if you want to experience love or wisdom or peace, the first place that we must cultivate this is within ourselves. If you want to see a forgiving world, and you want to see the results of a world that is forgiving, a world that is more loving, if you want to see these results, we must cultivate these things within ourselves. So, for example, forgiveness. Be forgiving with ourselves. Let ourselves make it. When you find yourself being critical, being self-critical, let yourself off the hook. Let yourself make it. You know something? I could have done better, but you know something? That's okay. It's okay. It's all right. And as a matter of fact, if I knew better, I would have done better. If I knew better, I would have done better. That is being forgiving with yourself. And as you find that you are more forgiving with yourself and you are cultivating that energy within yourself, then people around you will notice that you're being more forgiving with them. You will begin to give them a pass. As you are more loving with yourself, doing things for yourself, cultivating that energy within yourself, then people around you will start to notice that you're being loving towards them. Okay. On with Emilie Cady. Every person must take time daily for quiet and meditation. In daily meditation lies the secret of power. No one can grow in either spiritual knowledge or power without it. Daily meditation alone with God focuses the divine presence within us and brings it to our consciousness. She continues, doing is secondary to being. When we are consciously the truth, it will radiate from us and accomplish the works without ever having to run to and fro. If you have no time for this quiet meditation, make time. Take time. Well, I've talked in numerous talks about the gifts of meditation. All right. But I'm going to give you one more. Remember the amygdala that I was just not talking about? Everybody remember that? Okay. All right. I'm going to give you some information because when we are meditating, the brain is a fantastic organ. It's a fantastic thing. And it actually rewires itself with neuroplasticity. Okay? So as you are changing your habits and you're beginning to now exercise habits of meditation, the brain will then begin to rewire itself accordingly, and you will find yourself more peaceful as you do it and you create a habit. It rewires. And I'm going to give you some information from the Power of Neuroplasticity for Pastoral and Spiritual Care by Kirk Bingham. The process of resculpting the neural grooves and pathways of the brain through contemplative meditational practice must become a regular practice if we are to turn the noisy neural highway, so often amygdala driven, into a more peaceful and tranquil footpath. Each time we pause in our daily spiritual practice to harness the power of mindful awareness and infuse positive thoughts and feelings and views into anxious memory patterns and limiting states of mind, we build a small amount of new neural structure. Over time, the accumulating impact of this positive material will literally, synapse by synapse, change your brain. So I'm giving you the scientific reason behind why meditation is so important. I mean, we hear so many spiritual teachings that talk about the benefits and effects of meditation. I love spiritual teachings. I also believe that there doesn't have to be a divide between spirituality and science. OK, as a matter of fact, they are one. Just from different points of views, they are still one. All right. Continue with Emilie Cady. We go apart to get still so that new life, new inspiration, new power of thought, new supply from the fountainhead may flow in. And then we go forth and radiate it on those around us so that they too may be lifted up. Inharmony cannot remain in any home where even one member of the family practices daily meditation. So surely does the renewing and filling of the heart by peace and harmony result in the continual outgoing of peace and harmony into their entire surroundings. Again, if you want to experience peace in the world, as you begin to cultivate it in yourself, as you begin to cultivate these things in yourself, you will literally impact your surroundings, your environment, and you will become more useful to the society as positive change agents. All right. Cady continues with, the very circumstances in your life that seem heartbreaking evils and turn to joy before your very eyes, the very circumstances in your life that seem heartbreaking evils will turn to joy before your very eyes if you will steadfastly refuse to see anything but God in them. So I talked about this as far as street level consciousness versus 50 floors up consciousness. At street level, yes, you will see all sorts of things that seem negative, that don't seem to be for your highest good, because you are seeing things from a very limited perspective, and understand that there is a higher energy always at work, and you only have to raise your awareness to be able to see it. And see, that person that's 50 floors up, they're going to see a much bigger picture. They're not going to see all the little stuff. They're going to see how the little stuff is actually adding up to the big stuff. They're going to be able to see further down the road. And so that's what this is talking about. Continuing with Cady. In all external matters, we affirm deliverance through and by the divine within. There need not be a running to and fro, making human efforts to aid the divine, but calm, restful, unwavering trust in spirit as all wisdom and all power in being able to accomplish the thing desired. Victory must be won in the silence of your own being first. And then you need take no part in the outer demonstration of relief from conditions. The very walls of Jericho that keep you from your desire must fall before you. We are infinite beings. If we are not claiming that, however, our experience will not be that of infinite beings. For those of us that are in A Course in Miracles, that are students of A Course in Miracles, allow me to refer you to A Course in Miracle lesson 38. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Lesson 2, statement of being. Recognition and acknowledgement. So the next step in this reset is to come to a proper identification of who we are. If we are not in a proper identification of who we are, how can we then make the appropriate or adequate choices to impact our highest good if we really don't even know who we are? So I'm going to go ahead and go back to Cady. God is spirit, or the creative energy that is the cause of all visible things. God as spirit is the invisible life and intelligence underlying all physical things. There could be no body or visible part to anything unless there was first spirit as creative cause. We cannot see spirit with these fleshly eyes. But when we clothe ourselves with the spiritual body, then spirit is visible or manifest and we recognize it. So clothing ourselves with the spiritual body, again, this is in older languaging. Clothing ourselves with the spiritual body involves prayer and meditation. It involves denying false beliefs that exist in our unconsciousness so that we can clean up those false beliefs to open us to seeing new things, open us to seeing truth and affirming true statements in order to establish and reinforce what is true. That is how we practically clothe ourselves in a spiritual body. Okay. Now, Cady continues and emphasizes, you do not see the living, thinking being when you look at the body. You see only the form which they are manifesting. She continues, God is love. We cannot see love or grasp any comprehension of what love is except as love is clothing with a form. All the love in the universe is God. The love between husband and wife, between parents and children, is just the least little bit of God as pushed forth in visible form into manifestation. God is wisdom and intelligence. All the wisdom and intelligence that we see in the universe is God, is wisdom projected through a visible form. God as infinite wisdom lies within every human being, only waiting to be led forth into manifestation. Heretofore, we have sought knowledge and help from outside sources, not knowing that the source of all knowledge, the very spirit of truth, is lying latent within each and every one of us, waiting to be called on to teach us the truth about all things. God is power. Not simply God has power, but God is power. In other words, all the power there is to do anything is God. God, the source of our existence every moment, is not simply omnipotent, it is omnipotence. It is not alone omniscient, it is omniscience. It is not omnipresent, but more omnipresence. It is the principle of love. It is the principle of power. It is the principle of wisdom. It is the reservoir, the vast reservoir of all of these principles that we can freely tap into. We can tap into them without the aid of other people, without the aid of books, without the aid of anything save the God that exists within us. God then is the substance of the real thing standing under and supporting every visible form of life, love, intelligence, or power. Each rock, tree, animal, every visible thing is a manifestation of the one spirit, differing only in degrees of manifestation. God is not only the creative cause of every visible form of intelligence and life at its commencement, but each moment throughout its existence, it lives within each created thing as the life, the ever renewing, recreating, upbuilding cause of it. It never is and never can be for a moment separated from its creations. If God is all there is, and you do not see yourself that way, then what happened? What's going on? If we at Unity believe that there is only one presence and one power in the universe, and you do not see yourself that way, what is going on? What's happening? God, the divine light, the divine energy, has no bias or preferences. And you know, what's really beautiful about what's happening is we have the divine light that is now coming through the personality, and the personality does have biases and preferences. So it's like the personality is a beautiful prism. It is a beautiful prism. So you have this white light that's going through this prism, and it is creating this prism that loves spaghetti but doesn't like peas, loves corn but can't stand okra, and all these different preferences and things like that. But you have this divine light that's coming through it, and it's creating beautiful patterns, rainbow patterns. And that's who you are. That's who you are. That's what your personality, that's why you are so precious, because there is only one of you. There was only one rainbow pattern. That is you. That is me. That is beautiful. Let's continue with Emilie, Cady. Man is a threefold being made up of spirit, soul, and body. Spirit, our innermost real being, the absolute part of us, has never changed, though our thoughts and our circumstances may have changed hundreds of times. This part of us is a standing forth of God into visibility. It is the Father in us. At this central part of its being, every person can say, I and the Father are one, and be speaking absolute truth. The great whole, as of yet unmanifested good or God, from whom we are projections or offsprings in whom we live and move and have our being continually is our Father. And all people are brethren, because all are manifestations of one and the same Spirit. Jesus recognized this. And as soon as we recognize our true relationship to all people, we at once slip out of our narrow personal loves, our me and mine, into the universal love that takes in all the world, joyfully exclaiming, and then she quotes scripture, "Who is my mother and who are my brethren?" And Jesus stretched forth his hands towards his disciple and said, "Behold, my mother and my brethren." Imagine such a world where there is no them. Imagine a world where all people, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Jewish, Native American, all people are recognized as brother and sister, as one, as we, as our people. Can you imagine such a world? Can you really imagine such a world? Imagine all of the things that we experience in this society, all the challenges that we experience in this society. But with that consciousness, imagine how many of those things would solve themselves. Imagine that. Imagine seeing the world around you in such a way. In this state of being, you will uplift consciousness wherever you go, whatever you do. When you speak on this level of consciousness, people will listen to you. They may not agree, but they will listen. For the same God that lives within you is the same God that lives within all of us. And God recognizes God. Final lesson, contemplation. We learned in the second lesson that the real substance within everything we see is God. That all things are one and the same Spirit in different degrees of manifestation, that all the various forms of life and just the same as one life come forth out of the invisible into the visible form, that all the intelligence and all the wisdom in the world are God as wisdom in various degrees of manifestation, that all the love which people feel and express towards others is just a little, so to speak, of God as love come into visibility through the human form. Now she brings it home with this. She brings it home where she discusses unity principle number 1. The very first unity principle that unity principle number 1, there is only God and God is good. There is only God. The connection between universal mind and our own individual minds is one of the most difficult things to put into words. But when it once dawns on one, it is easily seen. There is in reality only one mind or spirit, which is the intelligence, and so forth. In the universal mind, and yet there is a sense in which we are individual or separate, a sense in which we are free wills and not puppets. Now she talks about mortal mind, which is Egypt consciousness. Mortal mind, the term so much used and so distracting to many, is the error consciousness which gathers its information from the outside world through the 5 senses. It is what the Apostle Paul calls the mind of the flesh, in contradistinction to spiritual mind. And he flatly says, the mind of the flesh, which is believing what the carnal mind says, is death, sorrow, trouble, and sickness. But the mind of spirit, which is the ability to still the carnal mind and let the spirit speak within us, is life and peace. She continues, there are today 2 classes of people, so far as mentality goes, who are seeking deliverance out of sickness, trouble, and unhappiness by spiritual means. One class requires that every statement made be proved by the most elaborate and logical arguments before it can or will be received. The other class is willing to become like little children and be taught how to take this first step towards pure understanding and then receive spirit by direct revelation, or receive light by direct revelation from spirit. Be like little children. We have to be willing to be empty vessels. If we already know everything, then we're not leaving any room for spirit. If we have that consciousness that because we have this degree in this and we know about that and we've read this book and we've read that book and we take all of that to mean we can't learn anymore, then we actually block our good, because spirit always has the perfect answer. It always has the perfect idea, and that may not fit what you've read or what you believe. So if your cup is already full, then you're not open to it being filled by spirit. For all those who must wade through months and perhaps years of this purely intellectual or mental process, there are today many books to help, and many teachers of metaphysics who are doing noble and praiseworthy work in piloting those earnest seekers after truth and satisfaction. To them we cry all speed. But we believe with Paul that each man has direct access to all there is in God, where little children who without question or discussion are willing at once to accept and try a few plain simple rules, such as Jesus taught the common people who heard him gladly, rules by which they can find the Christ within themselves, that through it each man is able to work out his own salvation. In other words, there is a shortcut to the top of that hill, and while there is a good but long roundabout road for those who need it, we prefer the less laborious means of attaining the same ends. So, I can tell you that there is definitely a natural learning from spirit. You do not have to have read this. I have experienced this before. So no matter what your education level, no matter what books you've read, when you are constantly turning within to the God within, there is always going to be a certain connection that you experience with divine information, with that limitless information that is always present. It's always available. So continue with Emilie, Cady, because I'm closing out now. Seeking understanding from spirit or truth within you, or seek understanding from the spirit of truth within you. Go alone, think alone, seek alone. And if it does not come at once, do not be discouraged and run off to someone else to get it. For as we have said before, by doing so, you'll get only the opinion of someone else's intellect. And that opinion may be even further away from the truth that you are seeking. Recognize this mind in you, the universal mind which makes no mistakes. Still the intellect for the time being, and let universal mind speak to you. And where it speaks, though it may be but a still small voice, you will know that what it says is true. How will you know? You will know as you know that you are alive. All the arguments of the world to convince you against truth that come to you through direct revelation will fall harmlessly at your feet. And the truth that you know, not simply believe, you can use to help others. That which comes forth through your spirit will reach the very innermost spirit of those to whom you speak. So, trust the God in you. You are God. You are beautiful. You are limitless. There is absolutely nothing that you can do. And so during this time between this Sunday and next Sunday, I would like you to put that to the test. Speak to spirit and ask spirit for what you would like to receive, for what is a desire that is in your heart. Speak to spirit plainly. Don't try to create a roadmap for spirit to do it. Just speak what it is that you want, that you desire, the desire of your heart, just as you would speak to another person. And when you speak to spirit, expect spirit to answer. Now, I've said in previous talks, don't have expectations on individuals. I have said that many times. Do not have expectations on people. All right? People is where your expectations are being misplaced. People are still learning. Personalities are still learning how to be God. Spirit knows how to be God. And so place your expectations and your faith, which are one and the same, there. Now, brothers and sisters, go and be that light that your Father, Mother, God intended for you to be. Thank you.